Welcome everyone. Is it on? Yes. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the International Workshop of Asian Urbanism and Urban Informality today. My name is Tamaki Endo, Professor at the Graduate School of Humanities and Social Science and the Faculty of Economics here at Saitama University. And I'm moderating first half of the session today. Today's workshop is organized by our research project called Informalizing Asia, Dynamics and Dilemma of the Global Megacities. We have been looking at how structural change such as globalization, digitalization, neoliberal order, and so on have been changing features of urban informality. We have a multidisciplinary team and are conducting both quantitative research, which actually we are now conducting the questionnaire survey in 6 megacities, and also qualitative research, including case studies on new digital informality, social networks, urban displacement, and so on. Let me introduce briefly today's program and the speakers. Today, workshop has 2 parts. In the first part, we will focus on the frontier of Asian urban development. We are delighted to have Professor Hyun Shin from London School of Economics and Political Science as our guest speaker. His presentation title is Circulating Asian Urbanism and the Politics of Temporality. And he will talk about new dynamics of Asian urbanism by looking at circulation of capital, especially at capital from emerging countries and circulating within Asia and beyond. We initially planned to invite him in 2021 with collaboration with the Institute of Developing Economies at Chiba and International Institute for Asian Studies of the Netherlands, which we had to postpone due to COVID. And that year, we still asked Hyun to give talk on gentrification in Asia, Asian context online. And we actually have a YouTube recorded on YouTube. So if you are interested, and we can share the link later. And now, now the traveling has become finally possible again. So we thought it's a good timing to get together to exchange our ideas and the research findings in person. So what he's going to talk about today is the most recent research outcome he has been working on, and will touch upon the frontiers of the macro change and the political economy of Asian megacities, which directly or indirectly influence the future of urban informality as well. And it will contribute to the fundamental understanding of urban dynamics, which has a connection to whatever specific urban topics we work on. And after coffee break, we will have a second session of new dynamics of urban informality in Asia. The 2 speakers are both are the members of our project. Professor Sayaka Ogawa will talk about new dynamics of informal economy led by Tanzanian merchants between Asia and Africa. And they utilize both digital tools and also analog traditional social networks. And Professor Wataru Kusaka will talk about new dynamics and the dilemma of urban politics in Metro Manila and from the perspective of the urban poor. And we also have a distinguished discussant, Dr. Zulen Aisano and Najia Hassan for each speaker. And before we move on to the first session, I would like to note the IDEs has collaborated with us as a co-organizer, and also the headquarters of the Saitama University helped a lot to make this hybrid event happen. So I would like to thank everyone involved. And also here are a few logistic announcements. Today's workshop is recorded. So if there's anyone who would not like to appear in the recording, please write to us after the workshop, and we will edit and eliminate before we release to the public. And for online online participants, please use chat function to raise the questions. And you can post anytime during the session, but please keep yourself muted. And we have more than 200 registrations today, and I hope we will have lively discussion. And let's move on to the first session. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Shin. And he is a professor of geography and urban studies at the LSE and the director of the Southeast Asian Center. His research centers on the critical analysis of the political economy of speculative urbanization, gentrification, and displacement, urban spectacles, and urbanism with particular attention to Asian cities. And he has published many books, as you know. Planetary Gentrification 2016, which most of us probably read already, and Neoliberal Urbanism, Contested Cities and Housing in Asia 2019, Exporting Urban Korea 2021, and the forthcoming book is The Political Economy of Mega Projects in Asia. And also he has published many journal papers, as you know. So he will talk about the 40 minutes, followed by Dr. Len's comment and the Q&A session. So let's me hand over to Hyun.
So thank you so much for this very, very generous introduction. As Professor Endo was saying, it was meant to be like 2021. Yes, and it didn't happen because of COVID. Although I was really pleased to also be taking a part in the conference in 2021 by giving the talk. And it's wonderful to actually come and visit in person after all those years to this Saitama University, which is my first time to be here. So the talk is going to be about this circulating Asian urbanisms and the politics of temporality, which is something I've been kind of working on during the last few years, including the times of COVID as well. The two cases that I will be sharing come from China, or China's developers from China, which have been operating outside China, basically investing in countries like the UK and Malaysia. Also, South Korean and Singaporean developers operating in Vietnam as well. So the China case was something I've been working on during the time of COVID, well, before COVID and continued throughout the COVID period. And the Vietnam case was before COVID and something I've been trying to also write off whenever I had some time. So what I'm trying to also kind of share is the importance of thinking along the lines of temporality, especially from the urban political economy perspective, which is what I've been working with. And I think it's very important to think of the issue of the speed and together with the issue of scale when it comes to thinking about how these Asian players, especially the developers, in my case, which operate in the field of housing and real estate, how they actually consider themselves themselves in terms of what they have achieved in their own home countries, and also how they actually operate under what sort of constraints when they reach out to overseas destinations. So let me kind of start with this example, which some of you may have come across several times already if you are hearing my talks. It's something I kind of keep using because it's such a wonderful example for my students, but also for my colleagues who don't really have a clear understanding of what has been happening in Asian context. And obviously, the audience here is not quite the same. I mean, you are very familiar with this story, perhaps, and you may have also seen it yourself in your lifetime. But let me just kind of remind you about this again. So one of the studies that came up in 2011 and produced by these two economic geographers was asking this question: how fastly Asian economies were developing in comparison with the European or North American partners. So they did a kind of simple study. They just basically looked up the historical record of real GDP per capita, and did a drawing and looking at the turning point or takeoff moment of their economy based on this real GDP per capita, and measuring the real GDP per capita value at that turning point, and estimating how many years each country was taking in order for that real GDP per capita to experience five-fold increase, 5 times higher, and estimating the number of years. And they found out UK, for example, the turning point or economic takeoff year was like 1780, and having taken more than 160 years. Germany, more than 100 years, USA the same. Japan, and as one of the early industrializers, more than 75 years. So obviously, Japan has experienced a faster development than the UK or Germany in the 19th century and early 20s. When it comes to Asian economies like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, or Hong Kong, which are often seen to be the model cases of those countries from outside the North American and Western Europe, or the so-called outside the global north. The few countries which are able to actually experience rapid industrialization and urbanization coming out of poverty in such a rapid pace. And so they were trying to estimate how many years they have taken. I guess usually in my class, I ask the students, can you raise your hand and can you make a guess? Given the time and given the, where you are different category. So let me just go straight into the years. That's what they have estimated based on the historic record, 24, 26, 28, 22, 25 years for these countries, including China. So you can see how quickly these economies were going through very rapid pace of economic development, which also combined with rapid pace of urban development as well, because many of these economic achievements entailed a huge amount of investment that was going into expanding their infrastructure, building their cities to accommodate the influx of new workers, expanding families, a growing population. All of these investment in social reproduction and also productive investment to expand the stocks of fixed assets infrastructure were basically coming together within that short period of time. I think that does produce very different ways of thinking about time and space in Asian context, which you don't normally talk about. So this is where I'm trying to come from. When you talk about human geographers or urban sociologists and anyone who does urban studies, we'll be talking about time and space based on David Harvey's understanding and other critical scholars, and they refer to Western experience of time and space collapse and condensation and so on. But when it comes to the site of Asian economies, where this time-space compression was really difficult to be compared with the Western experience, I think we don't really get a chance to hear how these stories actually fit into theorization. And I think this is where Asian scholars have a lot to offer to the global urban scholarship by theorizing from Asia and by rooting the studies in the history of and geographical specificities of Asian economies, and also trying to understand how such time and space compression has changed more recently when economies obviously have slowed down. Right? But slowing down in a sense that the generations who are in the middle of and embodying the whole time-space compression in the late 20th century, when such high pace of development was taking place, they are still very much alive. They are still very much mainstream. Who are still providing the cash and the asset for the children's generation, and still very much dominating the politics and basically sending out all these messages, discourses, based on their experience of compressed development. Right. I think that also creates very interesting generational tension as well, given that the current generation who haven't had the experience of such high speed of development, high speed of asset accumulation, didn't really have a they don't really have a chance to have the same kind of experience. And this is where they kind of feel like, well, what my parents or my grandparents tell me, that's you are fortunate to have gone through that process, but we don't have that kind of experience. And if you don't have the inheritance large enough to sustain the living, then the current generation feels like they don't really have a way to actually make their living or become richer. Of course, there's again a myth, a lot of myths being put into this kind of discourse and tension, right? Because it's not necessarily the older generation who was basically pushing this, driving this kind of development. It's not like they were always having a very comfortable, happy life. And it's the uneven development also kicking in society and geography as well. So some places were developing much faster, but becoming much richer, while some other places were lagging behind. within that generation also, people experiencing inequality and inequality, injustice as well. So many people sacrificing, right? So those stories are also very much the stories of that generation. But I think this whole experience somehow continuing as a myth, where the times of space and time compression through condensed development somehow become the kind of the foundation upon which the current discourse of what development should be, what urban futures should be being established. And this is just an example of how the older generation was thinking of themselves. Obviously, this is a wording that comes up from a politician who was very much at the center of policy making and so on. But nevertheless, that maybe is a nice wording that captures the sentiment of that generation who was able to be successful. We built a lot in 20 years, as much as other countries built in 100. Quick. That is Korea, right? So I think that's something that continues to be the kind of dominant ideology even nowadays to some extent. So this is where I kind of think about the temporality and temporal mode of governance. First of all, politics of temporality versus territorial or place-based politics being one of the areas of thinking more broadly and critically, and using the Asian speed of condensed development as a way of thinking about this politics of temporality, as I was summing up earlier. It involves the speedy resource mobilization by the state, especially during this time of compressed development, which was nurturing the growth of industrial capitalists, which was quite weak, and therefore the state was really dominating over them and nurturing them as well, which also produces this kind of a collusion, so-called developmental growth coalition between politics and the economy or capitalists. And also nurturing the rise of middle classes, which also shows why middle classes may not be always radical or progressive. They may be supporting the state, even if the state was authoritarian, which is probably what has happened in China and Singapore as well. Where the middle class, the dictatorship, or under the authoritarian state kind of discourse prevails. Working class exploitation, obviously, and especially the long working hours becoming still the norm, despite South Korea, for example, having gone through this rapid development and having achieved more affluence. You still have this kind of a situation. South Korea is still working about 400 more hours a year than workers in the UK and Australia. So when you look at the list of OECD countries, South Korea still tops, together with Mexico, interestingly, as the countries where workers work the longest hours. And then you have this kind of, again, on the extension of this temporality politics, you also have this kind of logic. Time is money, efficiency is life, which is a slogan that came out from Shenzhen, still dominates and dictates how people organize their lives and how the resources are being mobilized and put into certain uses. There was probably more in the case of China, but I guess you can see something similar having taken place in countries like Singapore or South Korea as well. There's greater emphasis on long working hours. Again, going back to I was referring to Korean case. In China, there's also this awarding of 996 working style from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, becoming the kind of norm for Chinese workers. So this is where I kind of talk about past urbanism under speculative urbanization, especially the whole ideas of speeding up the process of development. I think the speeding up the development process becoming very important, partly because the returns on investment. Yeah, the returns on investment does depend on how quickly you actually put the resource into use and how quickly you actually makes profit, right? And so the time is of essence, and this is probably where we come across with this fast urbanism also reflected in urban construction as well. So the sooner, the quicker you develop, reconstruct redevelop, then the quicker you actually able to generate profit. And this is also very important on the financialization, where many of these investments actually are going to be based on loans from financial institutions, and the longer you delay your repayment, of course, the more cost you're going to bear, right? So it just, the whole idea of temporality speeding up and becoming the norm in this case in capitalist societies. And I think this is even more so because of the experience these Asian economies embodied during the time of condensed development in the 20th century. So this is where fast urbanism accompanying aspirations to realize excessive profits with high risk, enticing both businesses and individuals, such as property owners, with the abilities to mobilize their social and financial capital to realize such profits at higher velocity than what is expected on the normal rate of returns on investment. So many people try to get on the bandwagon of fast urbanism, basically trying to make profits as fast as possible and sooner than later. And this is again where greater tensions may emerge nowadays when such fast development is no longer becoming possible, even in South Korea and China as well, where a lot of risks and challenges in terms of turning your property into financial asset becoming increasingly problematic and comes with a lot of risk. There's still lingering property hegemony, obviously, where property investment and speculation becoming very much the governing principle in urban lives. And this is probably a very tricky moment nowadays in the recent years, where the hegemony itself increasingly seeing the possible erosion of its foundation, and therefore potentially counter hegemony having the chance to actually gain some momentum. And this is where some questions can be raised, right? Differential embodiment of temporalities. Questions such as, how does each generation face their own challenges in terms of thinking about the urban future? How do differences in temporalities across geographies embodied by various urban agents contribute to the production of uneven development? And also, these kind of questions are something I've been working with and trying in more recent years. Of course, these questions are also very much central to debate on gentrification as well, which involves property investment and the speed of displacement becoming always the case of huge importance. So these are also feeding into my discussion about gentrification, displacement, also urban large-scale city construction as well. And also it's going to be important when it comes to thinking about the urban futures as well. What sort of urban futures are we going to produce? And that's going to be really in need of thinking more about the different notions of temporality as advocated by different urban players. And this is where I try to come back to this issue of urban the temporality in urban political economy, especially in the context of Asia's pursuit of speedy development and condensed urbanization, and therefore the whole pursuit of faster city construction, which is still very much the case in other parts of Asia, especially who are trying to mimic the experience of East Asian economies in a previous development experience, right? So in countries like India, for example, the Indian government trying to produce this kind of construction of 100 smart cities, which is to some extent inspired by the experience of development in countries like Singapore or China, and to some extent South Korea as well. In Asia's urban political economy, the role of the state has been prominent, which is why we get to hear the state-led urbanization, and also very much centered on land issue. And there's a nice expression by Chen and Woodworth in the 2018 paper, which refers to urban speed machine. That's in the context of China for them, where the speed machine is being very much behind China's rapid urbanization and urban accumulation, and they refer to where the role of governmental officers and bureaucrats who are actually assessed on the basis of their performance in promoting development or the land accumulation and so on. Such line of inquiry nevertheless leaves untouched another equally critical part of this urban speed machine, which is property developers who are translating urban political economy into material forms of the city for profit. And especially these property developers, even in the context of China, you get to have a lot of increasingly the private developers as well, not just the state-owned enterprise. And therefore, this is where I kind of at the moment, as of now, in the broader context of thinking about the temporality in urban political economy, more detailed empirical study-wise, I'm trying to look at the role of property developers in pursuing large-scale development. So, how are similar patterns of fast-track city enabled and conditioned in this process, especially trying to address this question by looking at how these developers who have gained expertise by driving development within their home countries, what happens when they reach out to overseas destinations. And this is also in the context of how these East Asian economies have become inspiration and source of aspiration for other economies in other parts of the global South. So China becoming the source of inspiration and to some extent, the source of some innovation in the eyes of African government. So a lot of the people talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, and they talk about industrial parks and infrastructure construction. But also, it's probably important to also think about how China has also become, not on just along the lines of political kind of influence maximization logics, but it's probably important to also think about how they are being seen by African leaders who are trying to achieve something in a very condensed period of time. The same goes to other economies in Southeast Asia and the Middle East as well, who are basically seeing Asia as kind of as a place to learn from, right? So when they kind of look at where to look at, which countries to look at in terms of acquiring lessons for their own development, it seems increasingly that these developing countries are looking at East Asian or Southeast Asian economies like South Korea, China, and Singapore in particular, or Taiwan to some extent, because they see the UK, USA bit too far away. They see them in a different league, and they see that these countries were able to achieve their development over a long period of time, and Asian economies were able to do this within 2-3 decades, and they kind of see like that's what we want. We don't want to wait 100 years or 200 years to go through this period. We want this within our lifetime. If they were able to build cities within 10 years, that's what we want as well. Not like the UK or USA. Of course, there are politics taking place at the same time, but I think that's kind of the real experience they were able to see within their lifetime. These politicians in the global South who are in their 40s or 50s have seen how South Korea, China was able to develop within such a short period of time, and they want that to happen. And that's what I'm trying to say. Asian urbanism in that regard, and circulating Asian urbanism is really about how the Asian experience has become a reference point for these economies in the global South, and how the urbanism itself comes with different versions, of course. It's not just one Asian urbanism with a capital letter, but it's really in pluralistic forms, where experience of China, experience of Korea, Singapore will be quite different in terms of the actually embodied experience of development. But nevertheless, they do also have some sort of shared message being sent out, which is really the condensation of developmental experience led by fairly strong state, working with businesses in close collaboration, and basically using that as a way of investing in land and housing and infrastructure. So when it comes to policy mobility, although the existing literature used to be talking a lot about how the policy was flowing from the global north to global south through the use of consultancy firms or the international experts, It's increasingly becoming the case of where these East Asia, or what I refer to as global East, are really becoming the initial kind of originating point of this kind of a new policy mobilities. So the East moving to South essentially, and the interaction largely building upon what the kind of connections they used to have in more historically. So in the remaining time, let me just briefly talk about those two examples. I see that I've got like 15 minutes now. So let me just kind of look at the examples of Chinese developers in the UK, Malaysia, Korean developers in Vietnam. And obviously, given the time, these projects were lasting a few years, and so I can't really condense them. That's why I'm emphasizing condensation here. I can't really condense years of research into 10 minutes. So I'm skipping a lot, but let me just send out this key messages here. So this is based on the China developers which have reached out to the UK. So it's a Beijing-based developer. Having invested in City of London, in London, right next to the City Airport. So if you have a chance to go to City Airport, London, City Airport is one of the probably most convenient airports for Fijian people in particular. And right next to City Airport runway, there's about 20 medium-rise rectangular blocks, which remain basically empty at the moment. They were developed in 2018-19. By Chinese developers with the idea of attracting Chinese investors, especially Chinese companies who want their kind of a so-called European headquarters, and with the idea of these companies setting up, purchasing each building block to set it up as a European headquarter, and there was something that didn't work out eventually, and also they were having many different pages to be put in place. So this is the kind of, let me just show, this is basically the picture. By the way, all the pictures are either taken by myself or my team members, unless they are noted otherwise. So that's the City of a runway. These are the building blocks I was referring to, virtually remaining empty. And this was actually mimicking the experience of what they did in Beijing, actually, in Bangtai district, southern Beijing, where they actually produced this business park, where lots of companies having their own head offices. So the same company basically reaching out to London to set it, to work on this new project. And then another site in London is by this company called RNF. It's next to Battersea Park, central London, but south of River Thames. And it's a project initially pursued by one of the Chinese developers called Evergrande, which went into financial trouble, and then they sold the development right to this another Chinese developer, RNF, and they are completing this project. And they are basically, there's also another project, company called Country Garden, which is based in southern Guangdong province in Foshan city, where they were producing what is known as kind of forest city housing estate, large scale housing estate known as forest city. And you probably see this kind of housing typology across the world nowadays. It's not just this company, but many others mimicking this kind of a facade and combination of so-called green and the concrete. And they were reaching out to Iskandar, Malaysia in Johor, just right next to Singapore, where they are producing 30,000 units on this, pursuing the construction of 30,000 units. So this is part of the project site. Combination of high-rise condominiums with lower-rise kind of villa style combined. So all of these are actually telling us interesting stories of how these companies, based on the interviews that we are conducting. So we are conducting interviews in London with the people who are working with the Chinese developer, also government planners and other district level, borough level officers. In Malaysia, we also interviewed developers, their worker employees, and local experts as well. what came out interestingly is, these companies were really confident initially about their achievement in China. Basically, Country Garden is the largest developer in China, by the way. ABP seeing themselves as fairly large, not really that large compared to Country Garden, but still what they were having was this confidence based on their experience of having become successful in China when China was growing really fast. So this is in a top 10 or top 5 Chinese developers really strongly believing that they are the successful model in China, and they feel they could mimic the same experience when they were reaching out to overseas destination. And this is also where the speed and scale comes out to be quite useful. So scale and speed emphasized, and they are basically trying to do the same, replicate the same experience. Larger scale development, like 30,000 units provided in one go in Iskandar, Malaysia, on a land reclaimed, sea turning into land, and basically the large lands being the base for the larger scale development. Also, RNF and ABP, what they were aiming at was really speedy construction. Within a few years' time, we finish, we sell, and we use that to promote themselves in wider European market. It was sort of idea. It didn't work out. I mean, so this is where I'm coming to some of the interesting some of the further discussion points where, although they had the confidence, they tried to mimic it. It's not like they are always being successful, and there are many other considerations to note. And this is another thing, speed and scale. To make that happen, they really had to have. And they were really, and this is just kind of one of the interviews where one of the CEOs, ABP in particular, were frustrated about how things were not going as fast as he hoped. Another company, RNF, was also kind of, the CEO was also kind of talking about how he was frustrated about the slow process of demolition of the tower, which was meant to be demolished and reconstructed. And he was like, why can't you just take it down? In China, we could have done it within a few weeks. And here in London, it takes such a long time. And he was really frustrated about this, right? So that's kind of again showing the tension, when this experience, crosses, borders, boundary, travels across geographies. Doesn't always happen according to what they were wishing for. Another kind of example is, of course, regarding speed and scale. The scale and speed of delivery is something that RNF, and I know from speaking to them, the other Chinese developers overseas feel is one of their big competitive advantages. We can deliver, we are used to doing this, so we just go ahead and do it. And the scale and speed also entwined together, largely because also the scale of production also matters a lot. So you kind of order in large quantities, and I mean, you know what I'm saying. The mass kind of production, making it much easier rather than small scale production of different types. At the same time, on the right-hand side quote, because RNF is such a large developer in China, we can reduce. We've got economies of scale with buying in such bulk. Our supply chain should be cheaper. Then we should also model that into our own receipt project, which was what I was trying to say just now. And they tried to do this actually, because when they were reaching out to the UK and Singapore, Malaysia as well, they were trying to basically bring their workers from China, also work with Chinese suppliers as well, to basically import, what they needed for construction. So fast tracking development also in terms of assembling the land as well. Land assembly becoming very important. As I was saying earlier, demolition quicker in China also means land assembly much quicker in China as well, comparatively speaking. And this was somewhat possible in the case of Malaysian experience, largely because they were working with the local state to pursue this land reclamation. Rather than clearing existing heavily densely populated sites, they were basically going for a sea to be turned into land where they can actually start afresh on a tabula rasa condition. And that required kind kind of in a close connection with the local government. The same happened in similar thing happened in London as well, because it was one of the areas which was kind of remaining as a sort of empty site next to the city airport because of the airport condition, proximity to the airport, and it wasn't it wasn't seen to be kind of a appropriate area for residential construction. It was also in East London, which was rather dilapidated compared to the rest of London. And East London was for many years, many decades, kind of left out after the war, after the demise of the logistics industry, when the port was moving further down to the estuary of Thames. So the area was kind of designated as an enterprise zone, the only enterprise zone in London, and therefore receiving a lot of support from the London government, which was then led by Boris Johnson, who was really seeing in 2013-14, really seeing China as one of the main trade partners, economic partners. So he was kind of traveling to China very often. And that also kind of laid a foundation for CEO of the company from China, Beijing, having the opportunity and really making friends with Boris actually. And that's what many planners and interviews were referring to. The CEO was really close to Boris and they were really kind of friends. Right? And this is just a quote from one of the previous studies by one of our team members in 2016, who was referring to country garden experience in Malaysia, where they were saying, in Malaysia, no developer in Malaysia would think of the same way in the way that country garden was able to do. So saying, in Malaysia, one developer would probably just launch a few hundred units at one go. But when country garden came in, they were launching about 30,000 units. At once. It threw all the developers in Malaysia off. We were like, how can you put in so much supply in the market at once? And when then they came in with a very aggressive marketing campaign. They spent a lot in the marketing campaign, largely because also they were aiming at expats and also especially Chinese buyers in particular, buyers from China to be the main target in the population. And this is where probably the failure of country garden, to some, not failure entirely, but also the failure of the ABP company in Beijing were resulting from, because the Chinese government also placed a lot of constraints on sending money from China to overseas destination around 2015-16, and therefore this investment by individuals in so-called non-productive asset was discouraged and also even almost prohibited. So in a sense, the developers from China were largely kind of failing because of that kind of political tension as well, not necessarily because of their own fault itself. And that's what the condition is as of now, a few months ago this year, where they remain empty, still brand new, empty. So it's a kind of ghost city in London at the moment. Given the time, I just to spend a couple of minutes just to introduce you to this Singapore case or South Korean case in Vietnam. And this is really looking at how Vietnam, where large scale high-rise condominium housing typology was not something they were familiar with. So, but when you actually visit in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi, you see quite a few of these, especially in where some extent in the central part of the cities, but also in more suburban areas where they produce new large urban areas as part of an urban development initiative. Many of the new housing constructions are by local Vietnamese developers who also mimic the experience of Singaporean, Korean developers who build the high-rise condominium. Yes, and this is one earlier example where Taiwan originating developer having produced this very large scale housing site called Fumi Home, which is one of the largest Korean towns actually, because many Korean families were actually buying these properties for their settling down in Vietnam. You also have this kind of promotion, a lot of promotion of this nature, high-rise condominium being promoted that mimic the lifestyle of Singapore, especially in the case of Singaporean developers in Vietnam. The same happens with Korean developers as well. And this is where I also raised this question of, which capital is circulating. So on the one hand, we have developers. On the other hand, we have also individual families as well, who are trying to basically diversify their asset bases. So many Singaporean buyers will be basically saying, well, if I buy a house in Singapore, it's so expensive, but a fraction of it can be spent to buy a property in Vietnam, where they can spend their holiday and so on. So they basically, as part of diversifying their investment portfolio, they reach out to those places. The same thing has happened to many of Korean affluent families, who are also trying to grab these properties for investment purpose. Just an example of how such investment practices involving Korean investors were always not very legal, and there was a case of illegal investors being found who are investing in Johor Bahru, actually in Malaysia. Maybe a bit of connection to informality, but great financialization. Just regarding the experience of one interview I had, which was quite interesting, eye-opening, with a property agent, a Korean property agent in Vietnam, actually, who was saying, well, you don't. I was kind of asking how families from Korea invest in those properties in Vietnam, and he was kind of saying, well, they don't even have to come to Vietnam. They just call him without even traveling to Vietnam and just ask which properties are available, and they talk and they basically invest. And in the middle of my interview, he was receiving a call from Korea as well, from one of those potential buyers. And they don't even have to send the money to Vietnam, because they just send money, pay their agent in Korea, who has a relationship or another branch, I guess, in Vietnam. And so it's a company they actually do internal trading, but not the money travels from Korea to Vietnam, right? And also, he was also telling me, well, there's also another way, you don't have to go through financial regulation and scrutiny, because you can carry cash to buy these properties, where this company, large size banknote comes in. Singapore used to print a lot of these $10,000 banknote, right? They stopped doing it in 2014, but until then, a large number of these banknotes being put into the market, right? So 10,000 banknote dollars will be like what, 6,000 pounds? I don't know what it is in Japan yen. But if you think of it like 200,000 pound in a new property, I mean, you can carry it in your wallet, actually, without having to send it through a financial electronic transaction, which risks the scrutiny of the financial regulation and taxation and so on. So that's a part of great financialization I refer to. So let me just kind of go straight to the final conclusion here, given the time. So what I'm trying to say today is we need to think about the temporality of urbanization and development, and its impact on social movement and progressive urbanism in particular. And this is something I may want to, if we have more questions, Q&A time, a little more about, given that thinking about the temporality is really in the context of how we actually imagine the future. And imagining the future is really about social mobilization movement, to address the existing inequality, injustice, without which we can't really think of progressive future as such. And in this case, the last three bullet points, there is the faster city temporality driven by the pressure of time-speed compression to accelerate the process of industrialization and urbanization in order to realize value as fast as possible. That's what developers are trying to pursue. And they try to pursue this, especially in the case of Chinese developers, Korean, Singaporean developers. They were able to do this, and they were basically able to grow to become large in size based on this embodied experience, and they try to basically replicate this as they reach out. And this is also received quite favorably by the receiving end as well, especially government officials and politicians who want faster development without having to wait long years, right? So there's kind of an overlapping kind of interest in this regard, which also facilitates the traveling of Asian urbanism across geographies. However, there is also a contrasting need to slow down the process of conventionally perceived economic development through reconceptualization of the existing framework of value extraction and appropriation. The slow cities movement, which is something that has been quite trendy some time ago, maybe one of the small experiments. But also, in my case, when it comes to the issue of displacement and anti-gentrification movement, we need to slow down the whole process in order for people to mobilize and to challenge, right? But that time is often luxury for many anti-gentrification activists. And this is largely because of the whole imposition of faster city the discourse and ideology on developmental processes. So perhaps the key question to ask when thinking about the urban futures in specific geographical and historical context is this, were two questions. What is the ideal optimal speed here in this place at this moment in time, and how is it configured and widely accepted, which would involve a lot of discussions to reach a consensus across generations and across geographies. How can you create alternative temporality and urbanism, which would allow us to secure inclusive future of cities that nurtures the potential of the future generations and create alternative spaces of progressive urbanism? So I guess with those two questions in mind, let me conclude my talk here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much, Professor Endo, to holding this kind of fantastic event. It's always very difficult to have to make a comment to Professor Shin's talk because it's very wide, knowledgeable. It's completely out of my reach, but I will do my best to have some comments. All right. So I think 10 minutes is too long for me. Maybe 5 minutes will be good enough for me. Let me start with the final question that Professor Shin raised in the last slide. What is the ideal or optimal speed? To talk about this, we have to think about the speed for whom. Maybe it's for the government, or maybe it's for the developer, maybe it's for the local residents. In many cases, because if you're living in the city or in a suburban area, if you're local people, and one day if you heard that the big developers are coming to our village, you might think that, oh, let them come quick and we can become rich very quick. That is kind of simple logic. But it's not that all. When we're talking about the speed, we have to think about the different stakeholders. They may have different preference. As Professor Shin mentioned that sometimes there is a slow city movement. Of course, we have some stakeholders might prefer quick action like investors or developers, but not at all. Sometimes the NGOs, they always try to block. What kind of development? They always try to block the development. That is a kind of logic. Different stakeholders have different logic. Let me raise several questions to talk about this kind of speed. The first question is come from the Ginza Yonchome, downtown Tokyo. Actually, the Ginza Yonchome project, it was started from 2007, and I think it's used more than 10 years to officially start. The project officially started in 2007, but for a long time, there is no any kind of construction field. It's more like negotiation. I had a small interview with the local people in the Ginza Yonchome, and they say chose. They always say chose because there are a lot of small landowners in the Ginza Yonchome, and they say because each landowners have different property attitude. Sometimes they think this kind of property can be a commercial area. Some people say we want to be a residential area. So it's always difficult to make a judgment for those different small landowners. But somehow, when we're talking about the Ginza Yonchome nowadays, it's very successful, right? It took many days, many years, but even today, if you go to Ginza, it's very popular and foreigners are coming, Japanese are coming. This somehow is a very successful story, although it's a very slow speed, and many Chinese fellows, when they come to Japan, they say, what are they doing? They started this kind of project 10 years ago, but they're still doing this kind of project. Yeah, it is very slow, but somehow it's very successful. So there are another story, which is when we're talking about China's speed, People always think about that Beijing is a very successful story, but it's not at all. The cases come from Tiananmen, Beijing. Actually, Tiananmen is the opposite side of Tiananmen Square. It used to be the best known commercial area in Beijing. Even until 1990s, if somebody want to go to Beijing, of course they will go to Tiananmen Square. After that, where do you go? They will say Tiananmen, we'll have to go to Tiananmen. But nowadays, if somebody asks me, where should I go? I will never recommend them go to Tiananmen. There's nothing there, only building, new building, nothing. This is the picture. This is the picture of the Tiananmen nowadays picture. The project is very interesting that the Beijing government suddenly started this project in 2006. I don't know the logic behind the development, but officially they say we're going to hold Olympic in 2008. And the opposite side of Tiananmen Square is dirty, messy. We have to let them go. We have to make a clean, better Beijing. And the project was successful. They say only used 3 years. They finished the whole project before the Olympic. So it's only 3 years project, and the Beijing government say it was successful. But what we left, what they left is this kind of another kind of ghost town commercial area. And it used to be the well-known place in Beijing, but nowadays, even local people, Beijing people don't go there. And even Chinese people, if they go to Beijing, they will never spend their time to this area. And the original plan, they say, well, let's make a Beijing style Paris main street. And we're gonna invite all those brands, top brand from Paris or all around the world, let them come here and have their brand shop, but it never happened. I think they still have a Starbucks. That might be the most well-known brand shop. But other than that, maybe Muji, that might be the best known. That's all we can see today. So this is kind of a failure. Of course, it's very speedy development, but it's failed. So when we're talking about the speed for whom, it might be can raise a question for future discussion is that who need this kind of speed? Sometimes it's developers. In case of Beijing, it's the city government. They need the speed to finish this project. Of course, speed is used when we're talking about speed. It usually comes from actually it's from the bank loan. Let me raise another question. A simple case in Cambodia. Any colleague from Cambodia? No. Actually, this is the case in the downtown of Cambodia. There is a huge lake in the Phnom Penh city, but somehow one of China's developer found the area and they tried to make fill the old lake and make it as a residential area. And the Cambodia government did say, okay, you can do it, but the developer count is a kind of, it's not a top developer in mainland China. It's like a ranking between 200 or 300. It's not top developer from China, but somehow they can manage the bank loan in mainland China. And they try to invest their money to Cambodia. But what they had is that their bank loan from mainland China, usually it's like 3 to 5 years spent. You have to return the money to the bank, no later than 5 years. But what they face in Cambodia is that always there's a kind of protest against their development. So it's very difficult for them to finish all this project within 3 to 5 years. Actually, I think right now they are still having this kind of land filing process. So the whole development was failed. But somehow what we can see is that the developer, especially the Chinese developer from mainland China, they have their own cycle. The cycle is not the project cycle. The cycle is mainly based on the bank loan, which is 3 to 5 years. No more than that. You have to finish all the project within that time. Otherwise, the whole project will be failed. So that's why we see many failed development in overseas, like not only in Cambodia, but also we can see that Laos, sometimes in Vietnam, sometimes in other area, with so many failed this kind of development. So this is my suggestion that when we're talking about the speed. Wow. Sorry. When we're talking about speed, we have to think about the cycle about the bank loan. This is the kind of thing. So actually, when we talk, because the main topic of today's talk is that temporality. So I'd like to raise a question to Professor Shin is what kind of factors affect temporality? You mentioned many aspects about the liquidity of capital, but is that all? Or should we think about the stability of the regime? Maybe because in East Asian society, no matter what kind of political regime is, the stability is always the top priority, especially in case of China. So we have to think about, maybe we have to think about the stability of the regime. Of course, not only the regime, we have to think about the relation between the politics and the capital. I think each country has different story, but in East Asian context, the relationship between politics and capital is relatively close. I'm not sure the case of Japan, but South Korea and China and Singapore, their relations are pretty much close. So maybe we'll have to think about this kind of issue. And this is the kind of note, I'm not pretty sure, but I think it might be a good chance to talk about the relation between state and society in the era of urbanization. Because in the context of China, in 1990s, there are many discussions talking about state and society, but after 20 years of urbanization, we can still using the previous model or old model, state and society relation to talk about the contemporary China. Maybe in the urbanization era, we have to find another agenda or maybe another logic, another frame to think about this kind of issue. Maybe state and society relation will affect temporality. What we saw today's talk, but last night I saw the slide. In the slide they say the progress of urban future. You didn't mention many about this, the future progress of urban future in Asia. But what we saw after COVID-19 in mainland China is that many Chinese young guys, they say, lay down. We don't want to work very much. Bali, Korean says, quick. Chinese said, no more quick. We want just lay down. And because the Chinese society for young generation might sometimes is very desperate to see the successful story in nowadays. So maybe it's the kind of good chance to think about the society or the relation between state and society. Don't not only talk about the topic of urbanization, but also this kind of classic framing to think about what is the temporality in the East Asian cities. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Ren, for the very useful and insightful comments. Let me just briefly respond to each one of them. Going backward, actually, probably starting with that, you lay down or tanking as some kind of increasingly circulating expression in Chinese context. Yes, that's is true. I have a PhD student who is submitting actually today, who is about Korean youth or Korean kind of people in their 30s and 40s, 20s as well, who are struggling to move forward in their lifetime career and some are being stuck, leading a bit of a suspended life in a sense, and constantly trying, working really hard, but not really getting anywhere to have a stable income and stable settling down status. So her name is Yune Han, and she was looking at this and arguing that it's not necessarily when they are being suspended in their life, it's not necessarily they are not doing anything or lying down. But I think they are actually working really hard just to make sure their income can somehow sustain their living and so on. So that can be one thing. I think tanking in China is something. Or I can, yeah. So tanking in China is also something I would probably say it is becoming increasingly circulated, but maybe it's still not quite reflecting the actual ontological status and condition of Chinese youth. It's a bit of an aspirational expression in a sense, and probably practiced by some people, and therefore becoming like, oh, that would be really nice. But in reality, many probably in their youth, we still work really hard and long hours, and that's probably what I seem to gather. But it is indeed, probably an indication of the rising alternative discourse, which actually challenges what used to be more experienced previously. So yes, so it has its own significance and meaning in that regard. Politics and capital, I mean, that's what I've been also emphasizing when I was initially saying about the faster development also requires, has been led by the state to nurture the growth of capitalist, and in doing so, the strong relationship that they were able to establish, the state nurturing the capitalist and capitalist and basically supporting the state, which was what we have seen in the 70s and 80s, in particular in Korea, or 60s as well. But then again, the capitalists becoming even bigger, stronger. In the case of China, South Korea, where Samsung has become so powerful that they can influence many governmental decisions as well. So that's probably a reversal of the relationship, which it nevertheless still shows close connection in different of different nature, right? And I guess this is probably the same in China as well. The connection, close relationship is still there, but the nature over the years probably changing slightly. The regime stability, I mean, I can't agree more. Yes, it's an important factor. And one of the reasons why the ABP in London wasn't able to succeed was also because of changing political climate. Not only Chinese government was placing more constraints on overseas investment by individuals and companies in non-productive assets, but also UK, US, increasingly becoming hostile towards China, and therefore this, changing geopolitical tensions, also leading to someone like Boris Johnson also speaking rather in a hostile way when it comes to China-UK affairs, even though they were really the UK government in 2013, 14, 15 were really trying to become friends of China. And so that changing geopolitical tension very important. And in a similar vein, the regime stability becoming very important. And this is always important for capitalism anyway. And capitalism always requires this very predictable, being able to predict what's happening, reducing the risk is all about capitalism, and therefore this requires regime stability as well, which is one of the reasons why capitalism doesn't really say doesn't oppose authoritarianism. They have they see many authoritarian countries as their stable partners when it comes to making investment. So that regime stability is very important, of course, to make sure that kind of large-scale investment to advance faster in urban construction on a sustainable manner really requires the support of the government or the ruling regime, and therefore that's becoming, yes, one of the factors. So I stop there.
Yeah, thank you. So we have probably activities another 10 minutes or so for the Q&A questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and then I will correct the issue in the first round. So yeah, Sancho-san and then Joka-san. The microphone, please.
So thank you for fascinating presentation. I have zero knowledge on urban studies, but I learned a lot on that. Really interesting field.
Would you mind to identify yourself?
Oh yes, my name is Song-Chul Lo. I'm a faculty member of Economic Department in Saitama University, and my field is human resource management. So recently I'm looking into migrant professionals, more like a mobility of professional workers. And then so it was really interesting because you mentioned like a policy mobility. So the old days was like a global from global north to global south. But nowadays it's more like a south to south mobility. And it was interesting because that's exactly happening in the emerging pattern in the mobility among global the professionals, like IT professionals in Asia. So my question is, you mentioned, you emphasized that we need to look at which capital is circulating actually. So I'm interested in human capital in a way. So, and then you mentioned that this kind of circulation of financial capital or assets or the role of the agencies, real estate, to developers. So my question is how we can make sense of the relationship between these different types of capital circulating in these areas. Strictly put, for instance, in your explanation of the Vietnam case, Korean developers, they kind of develop in townhouses for Koreans. So it sounds to me like the Koreans first go there, and then developers, they start their own project to lure or embrace those new Korean population there. Or maybe that could be the other way around. Like first is assets or Asian urbanism like from China, and then Chinese or Koreans or Japanese found those places more favorable for them, and then migration can start. So we're just curious to learn your opinions on those intersections between different the circulation of different types of tech.
Please try to make contact.
Thank you so much, Professor Hyun. My name is Ishioka from University. My major is sociology. And thank you so much for your excellent presentation about urban temporality, speeding up development. And in your presentation, your perspective is from, in this talk, you take perspective from more developer or international financial marketers. But if we take another viewpoint from the local people or poor people, in other works, you mentioned like a displacement block, and they experience displacement not only one time, multiple times. When you displace one time, then after 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, you experience another displacement. So displacement study is not, we should focus on not one case study, but more process-oriented research. But now I understand this kind of, the chance of displacement and displacement clock that is connected with your talks today, because in background, they have this kind of, background factor of urban speeding up situation and temporality. So it's not a question, it's comment, and maybe as an historiographer of sociology, I can use your explanation about urban temporality is also connected with the research of displacement local experience.
Well, thanks so much, Tomonori-san, about the again very insightful comment. Yes, I mean it is indeed very much linked to what I've been working on regarding gentrification and displacement. So previously, if I was looking at more kind of the experience of residents, owners and tenants, which was kind of the center of my focus in my previous studies on gentrification displacement. I was also, of course, in that process looking at developers as well, and those are important part of my inquiries. And this is probably more to do, today's talk is more to do with how that, developers, how they were kind of evolving, yes, based on what they have achieved, and trying to understand how this, what sort of implication this has, for destination places. So that's probably on the what I was presenting today is the extension of what I have been working on, and obviously the fast urbanism, condensed development is all the foundational understanding of how displacement has been repeatedly experienced by these people. Right? So that's all within that kind of framework. Migration aspect is whether investors were coming first or developers were coming first. I find that question like a chicken and egg problem. I don't really know, what has come first. In Hanoi, the first Korean town, so-called in the first Korean townish kind of place where you see heavier concentration of Korean families, middle-class families, from South Korea for living, was actually a housing estate that is known to be Vietnam's first high-rise housing estate, which was built by Vietnamese developer actually. Had a chance to interview the architect and of this development, and he was quite proud of this introduction of first high-rise living into Vietnam. But that development was not really, that was quickly giving way to subsequent housing estates produced by Korean or Singaporean developers, which were to which the Korean families were attracted to. So Fumi Home, by the way, by Taiwanese developer, is actually the site of the largest Korean town in Asia, probably, or I think it is known also as like a second largest Korean town in the world. The first one being LA, and this one the second largest, based on the number of families living there. And many of these, and I think that Fumi Home started much earlier than South Korean investment by developers. So if you kind of look at that position and situation, maybe you can say families arrived first together with the investment coming from Korea, because a lot of investment were going into Vietnamese manufacturing sector, and South Korea turns out to be actually Vietnam's #1 foreign direct investor as of 2018-19. Japan being the second largest, and Singapore being third largest. And South Korean investment has been largely in manufacturing, like Samsung having huge presence in Vietnam. And many families who are working for these companies and other service providers who are working for these Korean families, all kind of migrating. And also, property agent was telling me many people who are similarly migrating to China were feeling that they didn't actually take, they were unable to get on the bandwagon of property investment in China in the 1990s and early 2000s. And they feel like they lost the opportunity, and they saw Vietnam as like the second opportunity that came to them. So many people also were known to be, I don't have the data, but the agent was kind of telling me many people here were actually migrating from China to Vietnam in order to take advantage of Vietnam's faster development. Yeah, so that probably is something I can share. But then again, yeah, I guess probably that's where I'll just stop for now.
It's almost time, but and I know that everyone is looking forward to having coffee, but then I'd like to go around the rounds, maybe one more round, especially for the students. If you have any questions that you want to ask. Yeah, and I'm not a student. Hyun Zhang from Yokohama National University. Thank you, Professor Shin, for a wonderful talk. I have two quick questions and one comment. First question is, you showed us two cases in London that Chinese developers actually, I think you mean they failed. Could there be one possibility that the properties remain empty, but it's sold already to Chinese citizens? This is the first question. And second one is,
do you see any successful cases that Chinese developers have been doing overseas? Because after 2007 or 8, Chinese government has been pushing around this so-to strategy to promote Chinese enterprises to go abroad. That definitely includes the developers. And being a Chinese living abroad for so many years, my comment to your study is that those buildings developed by Chinese developers, I suppose they are bought by Chinese citizens living in China. And why they do that is that they do not have a UK visa, maybe. Why they do that is that, number one, Chinese citizens, especially higher income class, they are looking for chances to move their family outside the country. And number two is to offer their children something for their future. This is the condition that they can lay down in the next few years and their children. So two quick questions.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Then I've got one question from the online and
Okay, I'm going to read out the question that was posted on chat. The question is, I'd like to ask, in the context of the study, in what possible ways do you think that informality and temporality intersect?
So the Chinese successful cases, I don't really have a list of those, to be honest. And but the RNF is not necessarily failure because they are still reaching the completion. It's not like they stopped. The AVP in London is a failure, definitely, because last year the London mayor actually took away the development right from the company because of so many years of delay and nothing happening during the past few years. So he got really upset and he took the development right away from ABP London. So that's definitely a failure, which is the reason that it remains as an empty site now. So it remains as I think that it only 10% of the site was purchased, and that the other just being unable to be sold actually, which is another reason why it didn't really work out. Whereas I think RNF was doing more kind of a marketing. The country garden in Malaysia doing a lot of marketing. Many sites, many units were remaining empty, but they are actually sold. And many of those I don't have the data, and the data regarding how many units were sold and how many units were sold to Chinese buyers, difficult to obtain. But interviews were suggesting, the occupancy rate was like around 40%. The remaining sold but not occupied. And I would imagine many of those were sold to Chinese buyers because they were marketing heavily to Chinese buyers in the first place. And Chinese colleagues were telling me, my tiny Chinese team member, Koi was also telling me they were already able to see Country Garden marketing this first city quite widely in China. I entirely agree with what you say about Chinese families, especially the more affluent ones, trying to diversify, moving their asset away from China. I was speaking to a former friend of mine who studied at the LSE, who went back to China, Shanghai in 2010 when I was in China, in Shanghai, shortly after Expo, and I still very vividly remember the conversation about how she at the time was only 30, just got married and about to start a family, was already planning to move abroad after some years of experience, after accumulating some asset, think about moving the asset to another country, because she didn't really feel China was the country for them to keep their asset in private ownership for their lifetime. She didn't really have that kind of confidence, which actually is probably also probably not in the same way, but many families do actually have the concern, which is the reason why they reach out to many European destinations to invest, and also to change the advantage of property investment linked to citizenship acquisition. A former student of mine was studying Portugal as a case where many Chinese families actually use the Portugal's this immigration system where they can only invest, as long as they invest more than 300,000 euros they can get a green card and to live in Portugal, which is a major attraction point for many families who easily have 300,000 euros by selling their property in China. Right? So that's another, probably prevailing kind of a practice that seems to be very much, exercised. How they actually do it nowadays, I don't know. I mean, but I'm sure they have their other ways, because they were still making similar inquiries in London as well and in Portugal, way after Chinese government placed this prohibition on sending investing in overseas properties by individuals, but they were still making these inquiries and still doing it. But I'm sure they had their other ways of circumventing, which is where I would come back to this informality and temporality, where I was trying to say just one example of how such kind of investment practices may be involving very non-legal ways or informal ways of organizing their asset and investing, that will have an impact on the speed of development as well, which is what the Chinese case was demonstrating. More discussions about informality, I believe, is the topic for second session, and we'll probably come back to these later.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to now close the first session, and thank you, Hyun, and also Ren-san, for a great talk and the discussion. So please give a big hand to the both speakers and the discussion. Thank you very much. And
okay, let's start with the second part. So my name is Kenta Goto. I'm a professor at Kansai University in Osaka. And the second part of this international workshop is new dynamisms of urban informality in Asia. And we have two presentations, which will be followed by two discussants. Right, so let me just introduce the two presenters today, speakers today. The first speaker will be Professor Sayaka Ogawa, who is a professor at the Graduate School of Core Ethics and Frontier Science of Ritsumeikan University. Professor Ogawa specializes in cultural anthropology. She has conducted research on the business practices of Tanzanian street traders and informal trade between Hong Kong and Tanzania. The recent publication include an informal used car trading system between Hong Kong and East African countries using ICT in Kojima, its International Trade of Second-Hand Goods, Palgrave, 2021, and the logic of open reciprocity in the Tanzanian Union in Hong Kong and China, Japan, Review of Cultural Anthropology. So, and the second speaker will be Professor Wataru Kusaka, who's a professor at the Graduate School of Global Studies, Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. He's an expert in Philippine studies using an interdisciplinary approach across political science, cultural anthropology, and sociology. His publications include Moral Politics in the Philippines, Inequality, Democracy, and the Urban Poor, from Singapore, published from the National University of Singapore Press in association with Kyoto University Press in 2017. So the two presenters will have 20 minutes for the presentation, and Professor Endo will be keeping time. So if you see 2 minutes, please try to wrap up in 2 minutes. So the presentation, it's going to be a back-to-back presentation, and then that will be followed by the comments from the two discussants who have been allocated 5 to 7 minutes for their intervention. So let me just give the floor to Professor Ogawa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sayaka Ogawa. I'm a cultural anthropologist doing research on informal economy in Tanzania since 2001. I'm very worried about I will be able to finish my presentation on time. So I will begin my presentation now. 動かない。動かない。あれどうやって動かす？動かない。無理。Sorry. Please help me. Okay. これで Okay. Okay. So in 2010, The use of internet and mobile money transfer services in via smartphone became widespread in African countries. The informal sector, such as vendor and street traders, and gig workers. In addition, buying and selling via social media became popular. The gig economy in Africa, however, is developing on its own in continuity with the logic of existing business practice of the informal economy. This presentation will examine the logic and practice of social media-based businesses of Tanzania merchants by focusing on the construction of personal customer networks through the gig economy and coexistence based on the principle of non-aggression of personal clients. I will argue that unlike formal platform businesses, informal platform businesses are derived not by the accumulation of capital, but by the activity of creating one-to-one genealogy and the construction boundary between oneself and others through such activities. Furthermore, I will examine why informal social media businesses continue to be active even amid the development of e-commerce. The informal sector in Tanzania talks about the importance of the personal customer network to support the success of the businesses. In fact, merchants help each other in various ways on a regular basis, and depriving customers of others is forbidden. Non-invention of the customer base is what makes their social media business different from the platform businesses, which is a business that sells to an unspecified number of people. Personal networks include not only those built in daily life, such as relatives, friends, and neighbors, but also many others that each merchant actively builds through their business. Personal customer networks are built in two main ways. The first is by gifting interpersonal transaction relationships. In the informal economy, there is basically no fixed price setting. As will be discussed in this presentation, merchants, even when doing a business via social media, say to certain customer for double the purchase price and to others for a discount on the purchase price. Those such price manipulation, they increase the fixed customer base. Additionally, they are more kindly business than professional business platforms. The vendor were able to were also the land boy. I don't know, a land boy for their customers. They are now transformed into gig workers. For example, if you ask them to buy underwear for you, they will advise you that this size is too small for you. And when you shop on Amazon, algorithm automatically posts recommendation for you. But if you always wear the same clothes, the vendor might suggest that you try a different design. If you are buying too much, the vendor will also worry about your financial situation, saying if you are close to paying your house rent, why not buy cheaper clothes today? And so the second is by gifting as part of a livelihood diversification strategies. The informal economy includes multiple means of livelihood as a risk diversification strategies for surviving in an unstable environment. Successful merchants in business will not expand their business, rather they will have multiple similarly sized micro businesses. This way, if one business fails, the other can survive. This is partly due to the fact that they invest their earnings in one business after another, and the percentage of bank account holding in Tanzania is still only about 20%. However, as informal sector has only one body, this strategy of livelihood diversification also means leaving work to those without work. For example, if one buys a used car and run a cab business while also being a used clothing seller, merchant can rent the cab to a jobless young man and reach an understanding with him that he will deliver 20,000 Tanzania shillings daily. Thereafter, when the used car lender decided that they have made enough money, the cab may be given to the driver who became self-employed. Those who are given job and capital in this way also became their clients. In his book, The Gift, Most and more stuck to the morally informal explanation that the return of the gift occurred because the house, the spirit that possesses the gift, wished to return to the giver. Taking a cue from his explanation, most argue that in that moral legal system, these ties formed through objects are soul-to-soul ties, and that to give something to someone is to give something of oneself. This is because the object bears the soul of its original owner or giver, and original owner exerts influence on the recipient through the gift. Also, most discussion of how has been variously revisited. We can empirically understand that the gift bears the soul of the giver. Let me give you an example. In 2015, a young man was running a timber retail store in suburb and buying timber from city timber wholesalers. However, the business did not go well for the young man, who was shy and a bad communicator, and he lost his capital. He asked an elderly woman at the timber wholesaler to sell timber in credit transaction. She told him that her late nephew had also been a poor businessman, but had become a good puncher maker with a reputation, and advised him, "You should become a craftsman because you are like my nephew." She then gave the young man to like a plane that belonged to her nephew. When I met him again 2 years later, he had just opened his one puncher maker's factory. He showed me the plane and other tools that the woman at the timber wholesaler had given him, saying, "When I'm taking care of my tool, I always remember the woman at the timber wholesaler. I'm just starting out, so I don't have the same skill as her late nephew. And to be honest, I can't afford to run a business yet. But my dream is to hone my skills quickly and one day give her furniture that I made." We don't know the dream of the young man will come true. He may never become a good craftsman and his work may never take off. However, we do know that the soul of the timber wholesaler haunts the tool he holds in his hand. As he tells it, he lives every day with her individual alter ego of the woman who wished for him to become a good craftsman like her nephew. Perhaps he also lives with the individual of her nephew, the first owner of the tool. Like the mementos of the parents or a ring given by a lover, his furniture tool acts on behalf of the giver, the woman who is the original owner. The agency of the tool acts on his one way of life and on life itself. Of course, not every gift will have the soul or personality of the giver. The giver's soul is recognized after the possession of the tangible and intangible gift, which can be recalled by saying, "I'm alive now because of that event," or "My life has changed because of that gift at the time." No doubt, it is one such gift the merchant takes pride in cheating rich people in order to sell their commodity to the customer who would not normally have been able to afford them. Or that successful trader, as part of their livelihood diversification strategies, give job or gift to the other who have no job. In such cases, their business strategy is synonymous with giving individuals a part of themselves to others. Their social media business is built on sharing economic niche by acknowledging each other's customers who possesses the individual they have given through such gift. Sorry. I try to explain how they do the business in social media. The following is a description how merchants use Instagram, Facebook, and other social networking sites to conduct their business. First, the merchant posts images and video of the product that they sell and their contact information number on social media. So the price may or may not be posted. In most cases, they can be negotiated individually through the WhatsApp chat. For example, a picture of 5,500 Shin. If the merchant can sell the underwear for 5,000 each, they will make a profit. As they negotiate individually, there are many videos in which the merchant do not advertise their product. Where the video, like those of YouTubers, in which they try out electronic appliance claiming, "This is amazing, easy to use." But some video, there are also videos that do not appear to promoting product. For example, their video inflicts the merchant dancing happily in front of underwear she's selling, and this picture. And the merchant does a skit about not selling his product and getting angry with his wife. And video that correct snapshot related to the trajectory of merchant life, like a video shown in wedding. In any case, prospective buyers of the product send message to WhatsApp and negotiate the price individually. And then, as the customer pay the merchant for the commodity with mobile money, a merchant using a car dispatch app to deliver goods to customer's location. And some urban customer may organize several dozen people to import goods through social media from Tanzania merchant living in abroad. Recently, e-commerce have been rapidly growing in African countries. The e-commerce platform Jumia, also known as Alibaba of the African continent, is gaining popular in Tanzania. However, according to a news article, it seems to be struggling. I predict that these formal e-commerce and informal social media businesses will coexist for some time, just as the informal economy does not disappear even as the formal economy develops. I traveled to Tanzania in August 2022 and met a merchant named Sanze who imports cosmetics and gray hair dyes from China. Sanze explained that Kenya is a step ahead in the internet business in Africa, but he doubts the platform business penetrate to Tanzania. Because Tanzania have not yet developed the literacy to use the platform sufficiently. And he added that following: in Tanzania, advertising how good a product is and how good the price is does not work because people suspect that it must be a scam and think that only merchants they know will deliver good product in low price. Simply put, Tanzanians are not looking for product they want to buy. They're looking for someone they know who sells what they want. Many merchants agree the consumer are choosing who they buy from among the merchants they know. One reason for this is that the media they use as social media are not professional business platforms. In fact, when people purchase products from anonymous accounts on social media, they are often scammed, such as receiving products that are completely different from the images or defective items. Some people change the name of their account and repeat the same scam after the scam is discovered. However, if consumers just want to avoid being cheated, they can use legitimate e-commerce sites. Nevertheless, consumers still prefer social media business because there are rude personal interaction. Consumers living on the edge accept the convenience of a system that delivers product quickly when needed, but they are sensitive to the risk of being guided by algorithms that recommend products one after another, leading them to overpay for useless or expensive items. Consumer says if you buy a bad product on a shopping site at a higher price than the market price, it is your one responsibility. But if you buy a bad product at higher price from a familiar merchant, you can negotiate with him to get a good product in lower price when you are in a bad situation. Merchants are aware of this consumer's mindset, so they use video not only to advertise their product, but also to promote their own situation. So, indeed, the advertisement strategies in Tanzania is very unique. I was surprised to see that Sunday uses ordinary middleman as a model instead of influence with several followers. Moreover, the model, a middle-aged middleman, was wearing a shabby t-shirt. when I advertise and when I advise Sunday to ask him to iron the t-shirts, he replied, "You think so? But it's a reversal idea of original idea." He laughed and explained why he had asked him to be a model. According to Sunday, the Tanzania Internet Business Society is divided along the line of each merchant client. In fact, many of visitors to the merchant social media are friends in the broadest sense. So the person who, the person who connects each of these merchants is a middleman, what occurred if he were wearing a shabby t-shirt? Wouldn't he look like he was in trouble? The merchant he has helped in the past feel indebted to him. Thus, when they see his shabby appearance in the video, they will surely distribute to their customer. So it is helping the circulation. Finally, I would like to consider the logic of the commercial world based on such a customer line. And Japanese anthropologist Moriyama Takumi examined Moth's theory of gift and makes the following argument. Moth said that to give something is to give something of oneself. However, something of oneself is not all of oneself. If this is the case, it is important to question that relationship between the self that is given and the self that is held without given. So he addressed this question from the Madagascar case. I'm sorry, I skipped the ethnographical explanation. The point is, it is fundamental for humankind to create their one family, discipline, and associate to establish their one genealogy or the trace of their one lives. In doing so, it is also a universal issue that they must give the gift on various occasions to be recognized and supported as having established a genealogy independent of the group in which they are embedded. However, there are differences in how they establish the boundaries between themselves and others depending on the origin of society. For example, David Graeber uses the same argument on contrast the Maori society known for its gift how with the Kyoto society famous for its potlatch. The Maori society can be seen as an overall cosmology structured on the birth genealogy that is in a same way related to one god. The aristocrat problem was to distinguish themselves by some unique act in the world that would otherwise have melted together. Therefore, the aristocrat sought their one treasure in the encounter with Western objects. The Maori history is the story of reciprocity between the inner self of one person and the inner self of another. In contrast, the cosmology of Kyoto society is characterized by radical heterogeneity, fragmented into groups with their one methodological origin. The problem for the novel was that they lacked an identical medium for comparing each other. The aristocrat, therefore, focusing on the accumulation blanket, later became coin, as a uniform measure of prestige in contact with Western objects. Thus, their history provides detailed account of wealth and property and few story of reciprocity. There are two poles of the familiar society, gift exchange, gift economy, and market economy. Let us turn around and consider what kind of society of informal economy is in the modern Tanzania. It appears that those engaging in the informal economy live in a cycle, acquiring money and goods in Kyoto-like society and sliding them into the gift exchange of a Maori-like society and back into a Kyoto society. So he uses the gift economy and market economy. In the marketplace of capitalist economy, the accumulation of wealth and goods, as well as title and position, establish the boundary between self and others. A society that places such emphasis on property is not, as in the case of Maori and Malagasy society, concerned with how to establish an independent self within an overall cosmology, but rather in the first place with how to formally define disparate people as the same people. The dilemma lies in how to create a society that formally posits disparate people as the same people by setting a certain indicator to compare them to each other. In Tanzania, with its pervasive capitalist economy, informal sector accepts a world in which one distinguishes oneself and others by indicator such as the amount of cash and social position and so on. However, many of these market indicators make self-establishment precarious for the most of the informal sector. Young people who had migrated to the cities with dreams become hawkers, street food vendors, or shoeshine men, and find themselves buried in the crowd of the poor and precarious working class. Even if there is a difficult competition to break away from the crowd, their small failure in business in an uncertainty environment will put them back in the crowd. What is the best way to establish a distinct and independent self from such a crowd and have a recognized by others? The quickly way is to give a individual a part of self to others through gift giving. By selling at wholesale price to the general customer, you can be recognized as an irreplaceable person, different from other street vendor or receivers. Moreover, the visual of the self that is disparate in this way creates its own genealogy in the world of commerce, apart from narrowly defined genealogy having a family and living independently. In doing so, they are partially transforming a world in which people are evaluated and recognizing on the basis of their property into a world in which people are evaluated and recognized based on how many people they have kept alive through the gift. So thank you. I'm sorry.
Hey, thank you very much, Professor Ogawa. Okay, I'd like to call upon the next presenter, who is
Hello, konnichiwa. Hello, my name is Wataru Kusaka, coming from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. Okay, I'd like to. Okay, the title of my today's presentation is Why was the war on drugs justified? Although Ogawa-san had a kind of encouraging presentation, my presentation is rather pessimistic because I feel in part because of my personality. Anyway, well, how can I operate this one? It doesn't move at all. It doesn't work. Okay. So, okay, thank you so much. So, you may know that in the Philippines during the administration, President Rodrigo Duterte, his administration killed thousands of drug suspects in informal settlements between 2016 and 2022, no? Yet, 80% of Filipinos, not only the middle class, but also the poor, urban poor living in informal settlements, supported this operation. So, based on this background, I like to identify this research question. Why did the many of the urban poor supported the war on drugs despite the violence and danger against their families and communities? Most of the victims were urban poor. Okay, so this is a kind of survey showing the massive support for the operation. So class ABC, the rich and middle class, class DE belong to the poor, so they also supported this initiative. So previous studies discussed Duterte's digital violent populism and people's frustration against the existing democracy, which had failed to deliver for the people. However, they do not pay much attention to the change in society. Therefore, I like to focus on society. You know? So today, this presentation focuses on the neoliberal transformation of urban spaces, socialities, and subjectivities. To say more concretely, the new economic structure has provided the urban poor with opportunities for upward social mobility. But this process has undermined the values and social relations that had sustained their informal lives. This is my argument. So I'd like to describe the situation of Metro Manila 20 years ago. This is me 20 years ago, very young. So I was a street vendor as well. I was selling fruits. No, I don't know why I'm wearing Che Guevara t-shirts. I don't remember. Okay. So actually, 20 years ago, it was estimated that there were more than 500 disparate informal settlements in which almost 40% of city dwellers lived. And 20 to 50% of total employment in the city was estimated to belong to the informal economy. So why was the urban poor, the marginal sector in the society, able to defy the law of the state? The answer is that they had weapons to defy the law. One of the weapons is bribe. So the urban poor bribed state officials to make them turn blind eye to informal settlements and also informal livelihoods. So this woman is a leader of street vendor in a street corner. She collected money from her colleagues, and this guy eating congee. Actually, he's a police officer. He came here to receive this protection racket. So this is the highly institutionalized. So in many ways, they land, electricity, water, they acquired these resources in informal ways. Another weapon is boat. The boat and the urban poor use their boats to make politicians feel obliged to help them in return. Local politicians regarded informal settlements as border-rich area essential to winning elections. So I like this photo. So the woman asking money to the candidate. The politician not try to shake hands, but the woman asking money. So they emphasize such value as freedom, dignity, and lives more than the law. They regarded the law is nothing but a weapon of the rich to defend their vested interests. Therefore, no law-abiding activities such values such as discarded or everyday creative strategy to solve problems and kind of feigning ignorance were legitimate. So they valued such things. However, this situation has undergone radical changes. One of the changes can be seen in housing or urban spaces. The urban informality has been countered by the rapid real estate boom since the mid-2000s. Informal settlements have been replaced by IT parks, shopping malls, and residential towers. What are drivers of this boom? That were remittance and consumption by overseas Filipino workers, and also office demand by the call center business. The Philippines is the center of call center business, and also so these economic activities cause the economic boom in real estate. So you can see the rapid rise of land prices. So this change in economics also change the rule of the game in politics. Now politicians came to prioritize enticing private investment and raising local revenue over coddling the poor. Typhoon disaster that killed hundreds in 2009 justified politicians, the private sector, and NGOs to relocate informal settlers in danger zones to resettlement sites to save their lives. So now many of the poor have moved to peri-urban relocation sites voluntarily or forcibly. So these units are affordable, even for the poor. However, people suffer from lack of livelihood, transportation, water, security, and other services. So people have water, they don't have enough water. So importantly, this one. So there are also institute resettlement programs. For instance, Aquino administration facilitated informal settler organization to acquire in-city housing. Some local governments also implemented in-city location projects. However, the cost of housing units are higher than peri-urban resettlement sites, so like this. Importantly, such in-city resettlement programs entail a kind of moral intervention to develop or to transform slum dwellers into good citizens. To acquire in-city housing, people must engage in frequent meetings, petitions to governments, and consultation with professionals. So these activities really require a kind of diligence and patience. Those who can go through this process eventually get a unit. And after these programs are successful, they built new gated communities to shut out vicious influence from slum communities where they used to live. Such influence as excessive drinking, gambling, karaoke, illegal drugs, and crimes. So residents themselves implement rigid regulation, like no video, no karaoke, visitors from after 9 p.m., no top press, no drinking outside, like this. So this is a one informal settlement. So they built, but this has they built disciplina village, no? So it says bagon buhay, bagon bahay, bagon buhay, meaning new life, new house, new life. So previous slum dwellers has become kind of disciplined citizens. You can see wearing a uniform like this. They are the beneficiaries of this relocation, units. So this is a kind of regulations. So like there are so many meticulous regulations, like you cannot open the door while cooking, you cannot smoke outside. There are so many regulations. So people themselves implement like this. The availability of this kind of alternative housing has criminalized those who remain in slums, legitimizing the state to demolish shanty towns and sidewalk stores. So this is a table showing the number of forced eviction of informal settlements. Another change happened in the sphere of work. So many youth in informal settlements have got new jobs in the growing service industry, and they believe discipline is a key to success. Neoliberal governmentality has constructed them as standardized, docile, diligent, and disciplined human capitals engaging in emotional labor. They are stressed by precarious, demanding, and rigid working conditions while not reaching a middle-class status. So they are private higher education institutions produce laborers for the global service industry in such fields as nursing, hospitality, management, and seafaring. Have you heard the term of hospitality management? This is one of the most popular courses in higher education in the Philippines. So graduates work in hotel and restaurant, etc. Yet the quality of education is problematic, and the precarity of global labor market often leaves many students jobless. You see, everyone is wearing a uniform. So hospitality management, seafarers, nurses, like this. And also the Philippines has produced lots of global care workers. Migrant care workers have faced kind of contradictory class mobility, such as partial citizenship, gender, and racial marginalization. Domestic workers, they care for foreigners instead of their own families. They leave behind their families in the Philippines. They resist against the prejudice by becoming professional domestic workers, but such attempt further make them more docile laborers. Shipfarers, they engage in dirty, dangerous, demeaning jobs, enduring the stress of shipboard life and racial supervisors. Not a few seafarers, they jump ship to seek their own life after being stressed out by the obligation of sending money to their families, who often waste it. Call center agents, it's also stressful work, because of night shift, minute-to-minute robot-like and emotional labor, caring for American customers under strict supervision. They must adjust their speech and sleep to American standards. So because the work is very much boring, this often insert human conversation with customers, but it just enhances their emotional labor capacity. Many commit absence without notice, but it also increases the flexibility of employment, so their resistance doesn't work. It further strengthens the work regime. At the bottom of service industry, so many, away from the informal economy, many of youth in the informal settlements, they work at the bottom of global service industry, such as building maintenance, cleaning, security guards, salesperson, etc. They usually work contracts of 6 months. And they must follow the strict regulation supervision for the chances of renewal and the regularization of employment. So they lose job before reaching 6 months. So Duterte, war on the undisciplined. So those who have internalized the ethos of discipline under neoliberal governmentality that deeply resonated with Duterte's penal populism, emphasizing discipline. They lament that the development of the Philippines had been arrested by the undisciplined, namely greedy elites, corrupt officials, and dangerous criminals. Thus, they expected Duterte would destroy the existing rotten system and rebuild the nation state. A moral dichotomy was constructed between undisciplined evil others and disciplined good citizens, abiding by the law and working diligently. Interestingly, Duterte's discipline also activated agency of even drug users who wished to change their lives. During the 2016 election campaign, I found not a few drug users supported Duterte. So I was puzzled. Why? If you might be killed. I asked them. So they said, if he gets elected, everything will be free. I'm so surprised. Why? And after exchanging conversation, I realized that they believed that Duterte's discipline would emancipate them from the vice. So they also wanted to have a new lifestyle. So they also changed it. Well, no, they wanted to change their lifestyle as well for the family, you know. So 1.26 million users and pushers voluntarily surrendered to the police, trusting Duterte by the end of 2017. However, those who surrendered felt bitterlight because policemen previously involved in illegal drug trafficking extrajudicially killed drug-related figures to silence them. Ex-users complained that it was unjust that even those who surrendered were harassed and killed. They repeated, I changed myself, Magbakura. The police also encouraged slum dwellers to report information of drug users and pushers. So mutual surveillance and distrust developed, damaging the informal relations in informal settlements that had supported their lives previously. So such a situation was extended to the pandemic. Duterte imposed one of the world's longest and most stringent lockdowns during the pandemic. He blamed quarantine violators as a major source of virus spread and arrested more than 10,000. 100,000? Yes. 100,000. A moral dichotomy was again constructed between good citizens and those evil others. Thousands were detained. So it was ironical, right? So we have to avoid species, but they created the kind of situation. And fighting the pandemic with discipline. So discipline was again emphasized during the fight against the pandemic. Discipline. Everyone was saying discipline. So even also on social media discourses, those who are waiting for the market, no, so very disciplined. They sleep us here. So this is the conclusion. Since the 2010, the urban poor have had more chances to acquire legal housing through resettlement programs and formal employment in the global service economy. The aspiration and the processes have urged them to expose discipline for success, undermining the value that once supported their informal lives. The process has divided the poor, especially legally and morally. Duterte's punitive violent initiatives in the name of discipline were accepted and appreciated by the urban poor, who hoped either to eliminate evil others in their neighborhoods or who want to become good citizens. So thank you so much for attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Wataru. So now I'd like to give the floor to the two discussants, but before that, let me just briefly introduce them. Right, so the first discussant is going to be Professor Ai Hisano. She's an associate professor at the Graduate School of Interdisciplinary Information Studies, the University of Tokyo. Dr. Hisano specializes in culture and business history, the history of technology, and the history of census. Her book, Visualizing Taste, How Business Changed the Look of What You Eat, Harvard University Press 2019, won the Hagley Prize in Business History, and Shimizu Hiroshi Book Award. The second discussant is Professor Nazia Hussain. who's an assistant professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives, the University of Tokyo. Professor Nazia Hussain received a PhD in public policy from George Mason University, where she focused on governance shaped by informality, violence, and organized crime in cities in the global south. Her current work is situated at the intersections of state theory, governance, violence, and politics. So the first discussant, Professor Hisano, will be making comments on Sayaka's presentation. And then Professor Hussain will be making a comment on Wataru's presentation. So Professor Hisano, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Professor Goto, for the introduction, and for Professor Endo for inviting me to comment on very wonderful, interesting research by Professor Ogawa. So I'm a historian by training, so my comments and questions are coming from based on my background. So please bear with me if my questions are kind of out of context at the point. So one of the things that amazed me or stood out to me was how economic and social relations are entwined and entangled with each other in Tanzania, as you showed today in the presentation. So along the line of these economic and social relations, I want to raise a few questions. And actually, I have three points. And my first question is concerned with what you call informal economy, which is the main theme of this workshop. And you provided at the beginning a rather broad definition of what informal economy is, but I was wondering what your definition of informal economy is in Tanzanian context. And I think that what you showed through the social media business provides an interesting and intricate case for thinking about what informal economy is. For example, those merchants in Tanzania use what you may call formal digital platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, which is not necessarily informal because it's part of the global economy, right? So in that sense, those merchants are not entirely informal, or at least they are using formal platforms. And besides, if their social media business has become rather widespread practices recognized by many people, then their informality may be understood as a formal way of doing business for them. So here the term or concept of formal may be different from what we think of as formal in other capitalist economies, like Europe, United States, or Japan. And when you mention informal social networking business, in what sense is their business informal? Is it because their businesses are based on their individual accounts rather than a company or any other institution? And it seems that there is no clear line between informal and formal, at least for Tanzania merchants. And if there is a line, I think that a line should be drawn based on a local context. Otherwise, there may be a risk of potentially imposing Eurocentric conception of economic and social relations on Tanzanian people. And in other words, so to kind of wrap up my question about informal economy, would it be best to describe their economic and also social activity and relations as informal? And if so, what do you mean by informal economy? And also, which I think leads to the social relations in Tanzania as well. And my second point, or my second question, or set of many questions, is related to social media business in Tanzania, which I found quite fascinating, and I knew nothing about this, so it was really interesting. And you mentioned the use of internet and mobile money transfer services became widespread in the 2010s. But how and why did social media business become popular in Tanzania and also maybe other African countries? And to what extent social media business is widespread in Tanzania? So I have no knowledge about social background in Tanzania, so I was wondering, like, what percentage of people actually use these social media shopping sites? And is it the primary way of buying things for most people in the country or not? And also related to this, who are the main customers who buy things from these merchants? And also lastly, are there any practical reasons why social media business became popular in Tanzania? Is it like lower risk or low entry barrier or some other things? And I think you did a great job of explaining why it became popular, because it kind of allows them to keep the social or more personal relations with the customers. But I was wondering if there are any other reasons for using this platform. And I totally understand that your research questions and what you are trying to do are not necessarily how social media business developed, as I raised questions. But I think that the answers to these questions could probably help us, or at least help me understand the significance of their business in Tanzania, and also probably even global economy and society as well. And also probably help sharpen the analysis of their implications. And lastly, you argue at the very end that they are partially transforming a world in which people are evaluated and recognized on the basis of their property into a world in which people are evaluated and recognized based on how many people they have kept alive since the gift. And I thought that was a quite nice way of explaining a shift in economy and society. But if I understood correctly, isn't the case that Tanzanian society, at least those merchants, have always been the latter? I mean, they had always been living in the world where people were evaluated and recognized based on their social and individual relations. So could you elaborate more on this kind of shift from more kind of global capitalist economic system to the other one? So whether you were talking more about not necessarily Tanzanian context, but it was a more broader kind of argument. And lastly, so what does so my last question is rather kind of big question, which you may not have an answer to, but what does your research, your presentation you discussed today, tell us about Tanzanian society at large? So what's the implication of your research? So that, and you don't have to answer all of my questions, but I would appreciate if you elaborate a little bit on those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, professors, for the presentations and organizing this workshop. Wataru-san, I apologize. I condensed your amazing presentation in like 2 sentences. But essentially, to me, what was interesting was how the disciplinary policies combined with the neoliberal governmentality, and that it had profound effects on urban spaces and urban politics. And to me, it really spoke in what Iwan calls about situating local context within unified global narratives. Thank you for this immense work that you've done. Also, please don't feel compelled to answer all the questions, but these are 4 themes which came to my mind. One was the durability of this template. What may be the implications for living in the post-Duterte era? And in terms of the politics of powerful players, workings of the state, as well as voices from the grassroots dissenting against the punitive policies. Secondly, in diverse literatures on the global south, scholars have identified how social networks and informal ties are the capital that the poor may tap into but your work shows that that has been decimated in Manila's context. So how do your findings speak to this literature? That's what I was curious about. Second was this very interesting thing about disciplina, the peri-urban settlements. And to me, again, I kind of extended that to the larger, bigger questions being raised by people about the peripheries, right? All kinds of peripheries which are being created. And to me, one thing that spoke was in your presentation, you mentioned they have lack of things. Is that a perpetual state of being for them? That's one thing I was curious about. Are these forgotten spaces? And then what does it mean for the evolving social life of the urban poor and the relations in these spaces? And not just for like in terms of politics from below or politics of resistance, but politics of powerful actors as well. Thirdly, informality. You mentioned again that selective criminalization had an immense impact on informal spaces, informal activities. And to me, it showed less of government efficiency and more of the nature of the state and its governing ethos. And so, and from the bottom up, we could see how people played into this only to be betrayed by the state. And so I wondered, what are the larger implications for the legitimacy of the state, citizenship and social order when the state gives you this narrative and then doesn't really deliver in a very blatant way. And lastly, something which is, I think, on the minds of everyone, maybe we've just survived COVID-19. Climate change is a big thing. So I wondered how we can pay attention to the ways people are governed and how people may be able to protect or push back against excesses, keeping in light your important findings. And you've already touched a bit on COVID-19. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.
First,
so much for great comments. I think all of your question and comment is very important. And I will answer your first point, my definition of the informal economy. It is a very important question because informality itself, it is very difficult to define. But recently, the digital informality or informality is that they gained attention from the scholars. And as you said, yes, the informal sector in Tanzania uses formal social media such as Facebook and Instagram. But at least, as usual, they do not pay tax fees. And also, the government, they are not captured by the government. Now, the Tanzanian government wants to collect the tax from the social media business, but it is very difficult because it's just an anonymous account. And I honestly do not know when the social media business were born. That Tanzania was many Tanzanian merchants. Firstly, they just uses the social media for the social communication. And maybe they find, I think, a very good media to sell the commodity. So the many people now, the formal store also uses the social media, but I remember the maybe very small merchants started to use the social media to buy their commodity in the 2000 early of the 2000. So and I believe I'm sorry, my question, my presentation, I cannot fix the point of my presentation, but I believe that Tanzanians do not like the personal relationships to be automatized, automate by the algorithm. So for the gig workers and in Japan or America, or maybe it is not an exploit system for the big company like GAFA or something like that. And maybe if they became the worker to using the formal protocol offered by the Amazon, Alibaba, something else, they can just they just not became just really exploited. Sorry. So, for example, with the speed of the evaluation economy, our society requires a self-discipline, exactly as Dr. Kusaka says. And however, in order to survive in the uncertainty environment of Tanzania, it is needed a more gray zone. So if the consumer said you later deliver, the merchant later to deliver, and consumer angry, they can't sell anything anymore. So therefore, their business requires gradual constellation of selling and cheaply to those who in need, and selling at higher price to those who are not in need. So I myself feel very threatened by the loss of this human constellation due to the operation by algorithms. So it is my interest in my presentation. Maybe I have to continue.
Okay, Wataru, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nadia-san, for your insightful comments. It can stimulate my mind. So I'd like to pick up the easiest one, and then I'd like to move on to more difficult question. So what's happening in very urban economic side? Initially, when they are taken to that area, they don't have community at all because they are taken from different areas, different informal settlements to the center. So they don't have no each other. So they don't have mutual trust, mutual relationship, and the people don't have jobs, livelihood. So and people doubt each other, and also peace is common. So people are afraid of the breakdown, public order, etc. But after 5 years or 10 years, they can create community. They take a few years for them to build new community. They need to demand access to water or electricity or transportation to local government. So they have to organize themselves. They have to create community for survival. So you can see the kind of process of building new community, demanding rights, resources to local government. But it takes a year for a few years. And kind of push back on the straight pandemic. Okay, I was affected by the pandemic, lockdown in the Philippines. I spent months during the hard lockdown. So I was there with my 2-year-old daughter. The government was imposing 24-hour curfew for minors for 7 days in a week. So technically, my daughter was not allowed to go out from the house, but it was impossible to imprison 2-year-old girl in a house for that regulation lasted for at least 3 months, I think. So we regularly need to break the quarantine regulations. So we are afraid that our neighbors may report to the police, blah, blah, blah. But later we learn everyone was also breaking the rules. So we just can't blind the eye for minor violation. So I think that was good time. If you look at social media, everyone was shouting discipline, but in reality, people breaking minor regulations. So because they healthy, I think. So I like it. I have many stories about it. So for more difficult questions, durability and informality, blah, 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 blah. So I think this template is rather durable because of structural nature of this phenomenon. Well, one point is that you're right. So informal type was very much important resources for the poor to survive for their subsistence. But this informal type has been increasingly commercialized in many ways. Previously, even annoying person was important. I hate that part, but the relationship was important for your survival. But nowadays, people judge if this person was to make friends with or not. So people calculate the benefit and cost of risk of being friends with others. So some people are avoided that kind of person risky. I hate. So they don't build a relationship. And also like global health workers, so for people to go abroad and work, to take care of their children or family. So people need kind of relationship. So people's relationship is a kind of asset to enable global labor. And also because of this informal side, people can go abroad, work, they can engage in precarious, low-wage labor. So, so informal side have become a kind of chapterized, commercialized. So you have to understand the transformation of the role of informal side. It's not for subsistence anymore. So they have different functions, I think. And also I like to say the state, So it's interesting. In parallel with the purity politics, the political administration expanded welfare, like free higher education and universal health care, etc. It expanded welfare. Kind of national welfare is something that has been underestimated or undermined by local elites. Local elites, they pursue their own particular specific interest, undermining national interest. But today's administration advanced was granted national interest through welfare programs and also abolishing red tape, blah, blah, improving state capacity. So many people enjoy benefits from this. So like this. So you have to think about this parallelity. Many people enjoy benefits from the improvement of state capacity and expansion welfare, but other people are killed extrajudicially. So this is a kind of neoliberal screening of the nation. So they invest human capital, not productive human capital, but they eliminate, the state eliminates and district. So the state has become more important, but it's not universal welfare state. It's very much conditional, selective. So this selective nature of kind of state function is very much interesting, I think. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now I'd like to collect some comments, questions from the floor. And if you have any questions, please, it would be greatly appreciated if you can be concise and please identify yourself too. Right, so anyone? Yes. So.
My name is Falcon Yoga. I'm a graduate student in the Master of Economy program of the Graduate School of Humanities and Sciences here in Saitama University. And my question is for Professor Ogawa about informal economy. This is quite interesting, I think, in the context developed by Marx and Mauss, the gift. In the gift, we see a connection with cultures that use the gift with territory. And I think that here it is quite interesting to see that, as you said, the gift economy is mixed with the market economy. And social media, indeed, in Tanzania are quite interesting for this reason, because they are quite useful for informal economy. I wonder if we can say that what was the informal economy in the structure, the physical structure of the city, has become something more in social media, something like an extension of the physical structure of the city and the virtual structure of the social media.
Okay, before answering, I'd like to collect some more questions or comments. Anyone? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is also Jeffrey Emonike. Interestingly, I'm a teacher training student from Nigeria. My question goes to Mrs. Sakaya. Right, thank you very much for giving your searchlights to Africa. As regards the aim of your presentation, I think I'll start from there. you made a very, very strong argument when you said, unlike formal platform businesses, informal platform businesses are driven not by the accumulation of capital. I think that's quite a strong argument. And in the context of Tanzania, right, just as you made mention of the informal sector, one of the major challenges we are having in Africa, West and East Africa, is the lack of standardization of prices, right? Even with the advent of social media sales and what have you, we still have that lack of standardization in prices where the final price of a commodity is determined to a large extent by the bargaining power of either the buyer or the seller. When you look at the context of this study, you would want to find out, or perhaps you found out that even in the social media business, when they post their goods or commodities for sale, they still find it difficult to post the market price. Why they do that is because they want a bargain. They want a bargain between themselves and the buyers. And in most cases, they start from unreasonable prices. For example, a commodity that goes for, say, 200 yen in the yen context, they could say it's 1,000 yen, right? And they would want to test the buyer's, bargaining skills. And at the end of the day, they tend to arrive at a price which is fairly, how do I say this? It doesn't go well on the part of the buyer. So at the end of the day, there's that economic ill, right, on the part of the buyer. So in the context of the Tanzanian market, would you still want to maintain the fact that in the informal sector, they are not driven by the accumulation of wealth?
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the board? Yes, please. If you can be concise, that would be really appreciated.
So my question goes to Professor Kenta. So thank you very much. I actually, whenever I read newspaper articles on Philippine politics, I have the same questions, and now I think I have the answer thanks to your presentation. But my question is, this is huge change, right? Those people who once used to respect freedom, dignity, and their social relations, they turned into like people who engage in social surveillance voluntarily and discipline. This huge change. So my question is, I'm curious to learn more about the time span during which this all unfolded. Like this whole event, it's interesting because these whole different elements, like a change in work and change in social relations, resettlement, all these different factors, they come together and kind of come to have this mutually reinforcing nature, right? So is this all happened in parallel, or is this kind of sequential, like something came first and then followed by other changes, and then that's my. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to now give the floor actually to Professor Endo. There's a related question on the web.
Yeah, there's two questions. So actually both are for Wataru, so I just read out. The one is from the Mr. Alvin, the researcher of geography from the University of Melbourne, and he said excellent work. And then it goes for the Wataru. I'm just curious if there are embedded disciplines in the informal sector in your study that they have navigated on their own, and as it discrete disciplines that are not course and formulated by state or state-related powers that the informal sector created on their own. Another question is from Kim-san. She's the assistant professor at Utsunomiya University, And she wondered if the Philippine state's labor blockage has been strengthened or under the Duterte era to absorb slum settlers.
Okay, maybe Sayaka can start with responding to the questions.
I think the two question is related. So I'd like to answer the last question first, the second one, that part. And indeed, it was too strong. I had to say that Tanzania do not accumulate capital. But I think that they prefer to invest in business rather than make saving the money in bank account. It's real. And for example, a friend of mine, a friend used car dealer in Hong Kong, who rolls over about 6 million yen a month. That's not necessary, but she don't save all of money in bank account, but instead buy land and invest in various businesses. And the reason for this, she said, is that if you keep the money in the bank, you cannot build in any relationship. But if you invest in a business, you can build many relationships. So I'd like to say Tanzania do not accumulate capital. Tanzania merchants make money in a capitalist market and then give it as a gift to various type of people through the investment of the other various businesses, and accumulating people who are indebtedness to themselves, and they use them to drive their business again. So this is not good heart. This is not, it is very rational sense, I think, because we do think it's better having 5 million in money or having 5 people who feel indebted to you, and they will help you in your time of need. Yes, 500 people will not be at your disposal, right? 5 million yen. But with 500 people, if your computer breaks down, maybe you will find some people, some engineer in the 500 people, and they will make they fix your computer for free. So no, and they can start any business if you have 500 people indebted, they indebted to you. So I think it is the gift economy and the market economy is not contradiction. It is that they combine the market economy and gift economy to promote their business. And I think that Tanzanian the urban and real world, urban world, yes, it is very resemble to the social media. Because I think in the city of Tanzania, they use it just nickname, so they don't know the real name. It's just anonymous in social media, and so maybe the relationship, the ordinary life in urban city, and the social media, the relationship in social media, I think it is it has a continuity. So I think your question is very, very interesting. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so Wataru.
Thank you so much for your question. So you talked about different questions. So it happened within 20 years. Perhaps it must be with the starting presentation, not perhaps 20 years. Because so it was something I was glad that people might be back in 2000. Now people so it's things have really changed. I would describe it as bunch of kind of mutual help society. People help each other for at a distance. But nowadays people are talking about distance for individual practice. It's this kind of process is urbanized or modernization, right? But perhaps in case of Europe,
there are 100 years, I think, but maybe in Japan 100 years, but in the Philippines, within 20 years, it's very content and discourse morality, means human relationships, many things have changed. I'm talking about different forces in terms of services or not. So I think change in politics happens earlier than social changes because the Philippine world has been dominated by landed elites. But after the World War II, non-landed elites emerged, like the Marcos, Duterte. So they are not landed. So they became powerful through higher education and professional as a lawyer. No? So the all these are different, but they somehow the social counterpart was not yet prepared. Only now the new emerging lower middle class, or they are not reaching to middle class, but they were already explicated themselves from subsistence beggars. So these people are resonating with this counter elites, non-landed elites. So this happened somehow only in this 21st century. And for the question for Melbourne, which the city I love very much. You have big companies in Melbourne right now, I think. Everyone is now in Melbourne now right now. I wish I was there. So yes, people have kind of self-discipline, but I people did not use the term of self-discipline, I think 20 years ago. But people have different kind of morality of caring each other. People complain each other a lot, no? But people still, while complaining each other, they help each other. That was the kind of morality 20 years ago, which I observed on the street and informal settlement. But nowadays, it's kind of it's the moral discourse has changed. Now people are kind of discipline. Those who people justify, those who do not have a discipline can be eradicated. So I don't know. So I don't know. This is what you're asking. I'm sorry. So and also the third question is about utility housing policy. I think I said Duterte didn't increase the budget for housing. He cut the budget for housing. He doesn't have much housing projects. It was local government units which provided resettlement program. Yeah, it was the administrator. At the national level, it was an administrator which engaged in massive resettlement program. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm pretty sure that there are other questions and comments, but I think unfortunately we are running out of time. So it is actually now my role to try to close it. It is impossible for any human being to make a sort of concise statement about today's diverse and interesting presentation and discussions. And just a way to sum it up by providing my comments briefly for this particular session. About Professor Ogawa Sayaka's presentation, really the personal attributes and the personalized context matter to understand behavioral patterns in people in the informal economy, particularly pertaining to survival at the least, and probably as a way to overall well-being as an overarching goal. So that was pretty new. What was interesting to know is about giving mind and soul a place in economic exchange is helpful in understanding economic phenomena at a broader level. So, which is not what traditional economic research have necessarily focused on. And so new avenues to better understand informal economic activity, could be there in a much richer sense. So this contains a very strong and inciting message to people like myself, who tend to approach the issue from an economics disciplinary perspective. The recognition that a market-based ideology of material or property or tangible well-being, which have been the basis of neoliberalism and the policies as derivatives, may not necessarily reflect the dominant view of the people's aspiration, particularly in the context of informality. So I was really glad to be able to attend the session. For Wataru's presentation, the neoliberal transformation that have induced structural changes in the socioeconomic dimensions of contemporary urban life has brought some positive changes in perception and reality, such as increased opportunities for upward mobility. These in turn, however, undermine the values and social relations that had sustained on livelihoods and in urban informality in Manila. Such outcomes may have most likely been unintended, having broad implications, which would probably lead to new dynamics, which would be an outcome of complex interaction in which a search for new informal livelihood strategies would take place, along with the newly evolving narratives and the political dimensions of contemporary urbanity. So, you know, coming from an economic background, it's really these kind of discussions that we ought to have among different disciplines. So the strong message I got out from today's workshop is that narratives in cases do define how perceived realities are going to be addressed, which in turn creates realities. So as such, we have a moral obligation, I think, to say the least, to encourage a multidisciplinary approach to allow for a more balanced and perhaps nuanced and realistic view and appreciation of the world that is based on constructive diversity. So with that note, I'd like to thank all the speakers in both sessions, session 1 and 2, and the discussants for today's discussions, and for all who participated in real and online today. I'd like to also thank the Secretariat and the technical staff at Saitama University who helped us make this event possible. And so if you can join me in giving a big round of applause to all the people who made this happen today.